one of the probative questions to me about consciousness is, can AI, artificial intelligence, ever be conscious in the sense of inner experience that we think we have? A separate but I think similar problem is the so-called mind uploading, the virtual immortality, that when you know everything about every neuron and cellular particle, and however deep you have to go, eventually, if you know everything in the brain, you upload it, you will upload yourself. And would that be conscious? Many people, what I call the techno-optimists in Silicon Valley, think that that's not even a philosophical question, it's an engineering question. So my question to you is, can AI be conscious in the same sense we are? And in parallel, is it conceivable and is it possible, in principle, to literally upload our first-person personality?
I think the answer to both questions is yeah, it's possible in principle. It's much, much harder than people in AI often think, and it's really ill-advised. If we were to upload our own minds to consciousness, if that became a feasible technology, it would change, in effect, the meaning of life in a way that we should be very wary of. Imagine that you had such a system attached to you, and you every Friday afternoon or every Friday night while you slept, you were backed up, whole mind, whole mind. Then, if you had a mind to, on Saturday, you could have fun jumping headfirst off the Golden Gate Bridge and seeing what it's like to fall to your death in the water. Now, you wouldn't remember it the next day because you'd be dead. But once they backed up Friday's tape to you on Monday morning, you could remember everything up to that moment, so you wouldn't be dead. You would just have a period of amnesia, and you could even watch the videos of you plunging to your death. Now, that's a rather benign prospect. You could do pretty much whatever you wanted because you would have a certain sort of immortality. And that's not a good thing to have. And one of the problems with the attempts to make strong AI agents is that they would have a sort of immortality because they can be backed up every Friday night, and they don't share with us the fragility of their agency, the fragility of their lives. And that would be a profound difference in their attitude towards the world. I don't see any easy fix to that predicament. I think autonomous agents are wonderful. We're autonomous agents, but we're also extremely dangerous because of our autonomy. We dare to go out in the streets and let our children go out and play and so forth because both mainly we see to it that our fellow citizens are sufficiently trained and educated that they're safe. They obey the rules. They don't go around committing wanton acts of murder and mayhem. And so this gives us the wonderful security to lead our lives. AI autonomous agents would not give. I would be very insecure on a planet where there were lots of autonomous AI agents.
I appreciate your caution and your advice, but I want to get back to the kind of the underlying question: is it possible, in principle? You said yes, and I think that is a coherent position with the one that you take in terms of the nature of consciousness. But there seems to me to be some very tortuous problems, and the top of my list is the one of duplicates. So I have a sense of my first person consciousness. It may be a user illusion, as you say, but I have that illusion. I have that sense of using my user interface. And if it is in principle possible, the thought experiment said if you upload one, you have the record, however many bytes of information you need, you know, 10 to the 20th or whatever you think you may need. You can do it once, you can do it twice. If you do it twice, you do it as many times as you want. So in that experiment, how do you deal with the problem of duplicates, and what happens to your first person experience? Each of the duplicates would think they're me, of course, but would that be anything more than a twin brother, an identical twin that I might have had at birth, that the genetics are the same and then instantly they differentiate? But it still leaves the question of that initial first person experience. What happens to that?
Actually, Doug Hofstadter and I dealt with this in the book The Mind's Eye, published way back in the 80s. And that book begins with precisely that thought experiment where you're on Mars, and the question is, do you get into the Mark III teleclone, which is a duplicating machine which will transmit you digitally, electronically back to Earth, while meanwhile destroying the body on Mars in order to duplicate it on Earth. Is this a way of getting home to Earth, or is this a way of committing suicide and having a duplicate twin take over your life? It's an endlessly amusing fantasy to think about. And I think in the end, there isn't a hard and fast principled answer.
But
The
doesn't there have
person who
to
is
be?
you right now has exchanged almost all of the molecules and atoms in your body over the course of your life.
Right.
It's still you. It's it's the old problem of the ship of Theseus. Uh, we rebuild the ship at sea and come back into port, and there's the ship of Theseus. But what if somebody's been going around gathering up all the parts that we discard as they wear out and has put them all back together? And that's the original ship of Theseus. Well, which one is the real ship of Theseus? And these are conundrums that I think maybe don't have a principled answer.
Wait a minute, but the ship of Theseus is a philosophical problem. But I think when you introduce the first person experience, the inner feeling that I have, it changes the dynamics. I think the two seem superficially the same, but once you introduce the first person experience, they significantly differ.
Well, I guess we disagree on that, Robert. I think that there's a strong hunch, a strong intuition that the cases are fundamentally different. But I think ever since Hume, we've known that the idea of a self, which is supposedly, in some sense, independent of memory of information, uh, is just an oversimplification. It's one of those user illusions. Uh, uh, Yourself is no more an intrinsic, unchangeable, unitary entity than a quale is.
Is there any correspondence with traditional Eastern thought about no self and Buddhism or something like that? Do you think?
I think there is. Um, uh, every year, some of my students tell me with some excitement that the view I'm expounding is pretty close to what the Buddhists say or what some other Eastern thinkers say. And I think that's right. Not that I've studied it all that carefully, but I think that the Western hang up since before Descartes on the self as a special sort of magic pearl of me-ness, the res cogitans, the thinking thing, as Descartes called it. This is maybe a very attractive idea to many people, but it's just wrong. I can think back to an episode in my childhood that was, let's say, deeply embarrassing and humiliating to me when I was a child. It no longer tugs at me that way, not because I've become a hardened, crass old guy, but because I am so distant from the self I was then that I can look with amusement, with interest, with a tinge of chagrin on what I was doing back then. I can wish I hadn't done it, but the idea that there's an ineliminable, irreducible thread of me-ness which survives all those 70 years is, I think, a handy oversimplification, but we don't have to take it seriously.